Hey everyone, Sebastian here. If you've been following my work recently, you've probably noticed I've been spending a lot of time on on-chain games and autonomous worlds. And I wanted to make a video to talk about why I'm spending so much time on this, why I think it's so important, and also some of the work we're doing in the space. So some background first. DeFi is really hard, especially currently. And it's not just because of the engineering challenges involved, it's also because of the regulation that has gotten much stricter in the past 2 years, as well as the liquidity for these protocols has gotten increasingly centralized in a few institutional players. And given that the DeFi protocol with the most liquidity often wins, it makes it really hard to compete in the DeFi space at the moment. And so a year and a half ago, we were looking at this and trying to decide, well, how can we tackle use cases that can succeed just based off, retail user adoption, passionate users. And we figured gaming is probably the best use case for this. For gaming, you don't really need, an institutional player to come as long as you have a large, passionate user base. You can generally create a sustainable business and an experience that people really love. And so we started Paima Studios about a year and a half ago, and we're not the only ones who made this conclusion. In fact, at this point, Web3 gaming as a sector has a larger transaction volume than DeFi and many other segments of the Web3 space. And just generally speaking, globally, the amount of time people spend on gaming has gone up, and definitely the pandemic, played a role in that. And in turn, venture capital interest and investor interest in, Web3 gaming and gaming sectors has definitely gone up a lot. So much so that you see a lot of blockchains themselves creating kind of gaming divisions. So for example, Arbitrum has a head of gaming, Avalanche has a gaming on Avalanche Twitter account, Polygon has a gaming on Polygon Twitter account, and we've in fact seen multiple entire chains just dedicated entirely to the gaming use case. For example, Immutable X, Oasis, and Milkamita as well. And we've already seen successful projects inside this Web3 gaming space. For example, like, StepN and Axie Infinity that you might have heard of. We've also seen quite a few large Web2 companies enter the space. For example, Square Enix, Sega, Bandai Namco, Ubisoft, all these companies that have entered, the Web3 space, seeing the growth of gaming. And beyond just, these traditional Web2 companies, we've also seen a huge amount of NFT project interest as well. Especially because there's so many NFT projects these days that unless you do something, people quickly go to the next big thing. And so people have realized that gaming is a great way to get your, user base, your fans engaged, coming back to your brand on a daily basis. And so gaming has, kind of like been a great way for these PFP projects, these NFT projects, to build better user retention. However, not everything is perfect. There's a lot of infrastructure missing, and because of this, a lot of these projects have basically built Web 2.5 experiences, which is that users own the NFT, but they do not own the user progress. And I think this is not really ideal because, why do people play games? They play games because they want to feel like, a sense of progress. They want to, get items, complete quests, level up their character, and, feel this ownership of a sense of progression. And oftentimes Web 2.5 games, kind of take that sense of progression and put that in the centralized server, which I think kind of defeats the purpose of using blockchain technology. And so, why are people building Web 2.5 games? In my experience, there's kind of 4 key blockers. The first one is that right now it's really expensive to build like an on-chain game or an autonomous world. And I'll explain what the term autonomous world means a bit later. But as you know, like having a Solidity developer or a developer for another Web3 programming language is really expensive. And oftentimes, NFT mints are really expensive as well. And so a lot of projects just simply run out of funds before they can actually deliver on their, vision. And a lot of projects are hesitant to even get started because of the risks involved. I mean, if you have a known brand, be it a Web2 brand or be it an NFT project, and you get into gaming and your project gets hacked, like this could destroy your entire brand. And so we've seen this happen, for example, with Axie Infinity, where the bridge they used for their game got hacked and they lost hundreds of millions of dollars. And this really scares, people, especially, Web2 companies who might, want to bring their IP to Web3. Third was that user acquisition is really difficult. right now there's thousands of layer 1s, at this point hundreds of layer 2s, and users are split between all these different protocols that work differently. And so even though there's probably enough users in Web3 globally to power really successful businesses in the gaming sector, it's really hard to target the entire addressable market. And so this makes generating revenue difficult. I think lastly, it's the key one is it's hard to iterate. If you ever tried to build a game or something that game-like, you know that being able to iterate fast is key, not just to make sure you get to product market fit as fast as possible and build something that users really love, but also to keep users engaged. Oftentimes, games will have continuous updates every week or every month, so that players always have something to look forward to, a new experience to keep trying out. And quick iteration in the Web3 space is not so easy. And so Paima Studios tries to tackle those key issues. We allow people to create on-chain games using JavaScript, so it's much easier. The projects built using Paima Studios are by default non-custodial, and so it means that even if the game gets shut down, even if it gets hacked, user funds are not at risk. We make user acquisition much easier. For example, we support cross-wallet gameplay, so you can play from EVM, Polkadot, Cardano, Algorand, and more wallets in the future using account abstraction. And then we also support auto sign, so you can automatically sign transactions for a game without having to worry that this auto sign has any chance of stealing your funds in layer 1. So the auto sign mechanism in Paima is game specific. It cannot be reused to steal your funds on layer 1 or in other game experiences. And lastly, we support fast iteration by allowing every game to have its own layer 2. So it allows them to easily update their layer 2 based off user feedback, as well as we support stateful NFTs, which are NFTs that can evolve dynamically. And this is great because it means you can have card games that instead of having a single NFT for every card, which is really expensive to mint, and also really expensive to update. If you want to change the card or remove a card, this is basically impossible. With stateful NFTs, you could have the NFT with the user deck, and then you have this NFT just encode which cards the user owns in their deck. And this makes it much easier to iterate on the game and add new cards and remove cards and try and get the balance right. So these are kind of the core issues we're trying to solve. And the reason we're trying to solve is because we've seen, and you've seen as well, a lot of projects claim to be metaverse projects, and then almost always they're rug pulls and they don't make it. And I think part of the reason for that is, of course, in crypto, there's always people trying to, lie to get money. But I think beyond that, a lot of people don't realize the infrastructure problems that lie ahead and how difficult those are. And we, as kind of infrastructure experts, want to try and tackle these problems and solve this problem for everybody. So anybody who wants to create, an on-chain game, has the tools available to do that and really bring their vision to life. And kind of new word that's come up to replace this concept of metaverse is an autonomous world. And I think this is a great term for a few reasons. One is because metaverse, I think, has lost a lot of meaning, especially because of the association with scams, the association with Facebook and their kind of centralized platform. I think a lot of people have an understandably negative image of this term. And I think autonomous worlds is great because it kind of encodes the idea of decentralization within the name. It's autonomous. It's not controlled by any single company. I think this is a great way to remind people that, a true autonomous world needs to be decentralized. It can't be a single company in charge of the entire platform. It also hints a lot at the use of AI, which I think is, kind of a growing kind of area of interest for games, especially because if you want to have some kind of RPG game or adventure game that keeps people engaged and keeps having fresh content, AI is kind of a really interesting way to get there, especially if there's no central company in charge of the game. And so you can think of this as taking AI for large lore models or narrative engines, as some people call them, to help drive the growth of the game, the continued lore of the game. And so Autonomous Worlds, I think, really captures some of these key properties that we want. And the benefits of Autonomous Worlds is that users own not only their NFTs, but they actually own their user progress. The source of truth for the project is just a decentralized layer, oftentimes a blockchain. It's an open ecosystem. So it really means you can DAOify your gaming platform or your game, which is really hard to do in the traditional Web 2 gaming space. Like, if you might have noticed, there's very few successful open source video games. And part of the reason for that is because it's really hard to DAOify, turn into a DAO. Like, it's really hard for these games to become decentralized because at the end of the day, somebody has to manage the payment system, somebody has to manage the updates, somebody has to decide the next features coming up. But I think, with building on chain and building these autonomous worlds, we can really help open these ecosystems up, help DAOify them, and also make them client agnostic. So, I can have my client for the game, but somebody else can build their own client that potentially brings a better user experience. You might be wondering, like, well, do people actually care about that? Like, do people, really benefit from this, opening up of the gaming ecosystem, this DAOification? And I think they will, because if you look at the past, games used to be a lot more modifiable than they are now. Especially if you look at board games, almost everybody has, their custom own variation of the board games they play, and we saw that to a certain extent in the Web2 gaming space as well, with games like League of Legends and Dota originally being based off of Warcraft 3 and custom maps there. Popular games like Counter-Strike being based off of Half-Life. Popular games like Fortnite being based off PUBG or Arma. And so this kind of like, way to turn game mods into full experiences has been something that's happened multiple times in the past. And by having these ecosystems easier to open up, I think we can drive a lot of, more value to these ecosystems and, have a lot of, interesting projects come out of it. And, I think, kind of one of the key ways to phrase this that I really like is that oftentimes play to earn games are, tried, like they try to make them sustainable by basically having the company who wrote the game add incentives to the game. So it's like, oh, play my game in exchange, I will reward you for it. And it's kind of like the play to earn model. Whereas for autonomous worlds, the value does not come from a company adding incentives. The value comes from, kind of being memed into existence. And I think, if you've been on social media, the power that, these kinds of memes can have, and memeing some kind of idea or some concept or some community can be such a strong and powerful idea. And I think, autonomous worlds can really help unlock that. And, like because of like the AI component and these kinds of things, we really have like a shift, like a flip in the way of thinking about it, because, and right now in a lot of games, the kind of environment that the game developers have in mind that they build out determines the conversation. You're talking about the game in the context of, what the creator had in mind. Whereas in autonomous worlds, you can really flip that and, have the conversations determine the environment and what people talk about, what people love, and how they try and evolve the lore over time can determine the environment in the game. I think that this kind of like paradigm shift is going to be really interesting. And so, that's what we've been really focusing on as our North Star for Paima. Of course, you can use Paima to build Web 2.5 games, and you can also use Paima for gamification, which I think is also an interesting growing field, like traceability, identity, point systems, carbon credits. You can think a lot of these ideas as just a game. Like traceability is like you have a wine bottle and it moves around and kind of levels up or like gets more information added to it. And so gamification is also kind of an interesting use case. And at Paima, by tackling like the hardest part, which is these autonomous worlds and these on-chain games, we kind of almost for free get support for these less hard problems like Web 2.5 gaming, play to earn, and gamification. So I think this is also something interesting that we might explore more in the future. And part of the reason we're focusing on gaming first as opposed to these gamification use cases, even though they are interesting, is I think game is kind of like a leading indicator in a lot of cases where it really tends to be a catalyst for growth of a platform. We definitely saw that with mobile devices, right? When mobile devices came out, one of the top use cases was games. In fact, if you remember like your Nokia phone, if you had one, then like Snake, the Snake game was like a really fun game for the Nokia phones. And it really shows how like, games can be one of the first ones to innovate in a platform and really drive growth on, how they drove growth on mobile phones. They drove growth on Facebook. And I don't see why they wouldn't be able to drive a lot of growth on blockchains as well. And, part of Paima's vision is to basically build a modular gaming stack. because right now a lot of frameworks out there really force you into a single ecosystem. It's like, okay, you have to be on Ethereum layer 1, and the NFTs have to be on Ethereum layer 1, and the wallet has to be on Ethereum layer 1, and they kind of like really force you into a specific environment. And that's fine if that's your target audience, but Web3 is bigger than a single layer 1. Especially with the growth of layer 2s, even like the Ethereum ecosystem itself is now split into Arbitrum and Optimism and Base and all these other layer 2s coming out. And so with Paima, we want to enable kind of like a modular gaming stack where you pick your settlement layer, you pick your DA layer, you pick where the NFTs live, you pick which wallets work, you pick what platform powers your ZK side and what platform powers your AI component. And so we're trying to build this kind of like modular gaming stack to really maximize user acquisition and also allow developers to really build the vision they had in mind. And I really see this platform we're building as like some of the key ways to really formalize a lot of ideas that have been kind of growing in the autonomous world space. And so this is where we're putting a lot of our effort recently. I think it's been a really exciting journey for me to be working on a project that has a lot of productization, and we talk to a lot of external partners. We have over 20 games and projects at this point that have already signed up to use Paima, and we have quite a large growing growing B2B ecosystem as well of partners that want to provide services or different use cases for games and apps being built with Paima. And so it's been a really interesting experience for me, and hopefully you found this video interesting as well. And we'll be definitely doing a lot more work on Paima in the coming months and hopefully years. So definitely follow us on social media. We have a Paima Studios Twitter account, as well as we are on YouTube and Reddit and Discord as well. So if you're interested in following up, definitely check us out. And if you have any comments, definitely leave them on this video or leave a like, and I'll be sure to respond.